Hi, welcome back to what I'm going to call Lecture 3.2. This is the second installment of lectures, second and final installment of lectures for uh, Assignment 3. In Assignment 3 comprises two readings. Remember, it's James Scott's Chapter 5 and from his Against the Grain. I discussed that work, hit the highlights in the last lecture, Lecture 3.1. Now I want to move on to Gerda Lerner's Creation of Patriarchy. I've asked you to read chapters 1 and 2 of this work, and this is a pretty famous work. It's a classic written way back in 1986. A lot of folks still read this. And the question that Gerda Lerner tackles is how, when, and why did female subordination come into existence? As we'll see, I think there are some threads that weave James Scott's discussion of, why did the state come into existence? His answer there. Remember, his answer is basically what came into existence because certain elites wanted the state because the state was the means through which they can dominate classes of laborers, domesticate them, turn them into basically something like human cattle so that they can generate a surplus that the elites want to, enjoy. Gerda Lerner has a story that has questions about a similar point in time. Her idea is, she asks, how, when, and why did female subordination come into existence? And she's going to locate this way back at basically the same period of time that James Scott locates his account of the emergence of this early state. Hopefully I can sort of trace some of these connections between these two stories about the emergence of these large-scale relationships of domination. And hopefully what I can do here is relate some of these themes that Scott and Lerner discuss to the themes of the course. I want us to get a little bit more sophisticated, learn a little bit more, get some clearer ideas of what we might be talking about when we're talking about domination relationships. All right. So let's just look a little bit more closely at Lerner and try to work out her story and then relate it back to Scott a bit and then the course themes. Okay, so first, she has this question, which is basically how does female subordination come about? But we should back up and try to get a little bit clearer on what she has in mind, or maybe what we should have in mind when we think about, this idea that men are subordinating females. Like, what all is involved in that? What is it to subordinate females? Once again, this is one of those things, I think there's been a few times I mentioned this about our readings, where there's this key term that's thrown around. It's never clearly defined. Lerner never quite clearly defines female subordination. She just sort of seems to assume that we know what it is. There's a few passages here and there where she mentions something that she seems to associate with female subordination, and I will just point out 4 of them. I don't think this is a complete account, but I think it's enough for us to at least be able to sensibly talk about this question. When did female subordination emerge? When did this arrive in our history? And why did it arrive? And so, one thing she says, there's one passage where she says, look, there's male subordination over females. What that involves is that men have a kind of have power over all women in a society. Another thing it involves is the power of some men to define and control the sexual behavior of women in general. Then she said. Then I see another passage where she says, "Look, there's something like this nearly exclusive power of some men to define the values and explanatory systems of the society. So the men are really generating the values that everyone's adopting, including women, and so men are defining the narrative for women, and that narrative, of course, is going to suit the interests of the men, not necessarily the interests of the women." And then there's finally another thread I think I was able to find is there's a disproportionate control by some men, where there are no women in this group, this group of controllers. There's some men who have disproportionate control of the economic and political power of the community. I think a summary term for this could be patriarchy. After all, Gerda Lerner's book is called The Creation of Patriarchy. And this is basically what she has in mind when she uses that word patriarchy. It's a system where men systematically dominate females, and dominating females involves these four elements. Probably other stuff as well, but these are the four that I could find in the book Creation of Patriarchy. Okay, now Gerda Lerner considers a number of explanations of why, the mechanisms that generated the emergence of patriarchy, and she criticizes each of them, but she seems to take a little thread from every single explanation of the emergence of patriarchy that she considers. The first one she considers, and I think she's the least persuaded by, finds this to be the least satisfying of all of them, is a traditionalist explanation. As we'll see, she does take an element of this traditionalist explanation, but she thinks it's too crude as it stands. So just, a very rough idea or articulation of this traditional explanation. The nutshell idea is that male dominance is just natural. It's, in this sense, it's an expression of our unchangeable human nature. This is just the way the human being as a kind of animal unfolds. And a common idea that's associated with this is that because women are childbearers, and also attendant to that, because they're disposed to be caretakers for children. That's one fact, coupled with another fact, and men are physically stronger and better able to hunt, men will tend to dominate women. So the idea is that there are these natural features of male and female humans that leads to this, abiding and reliable tendency for groups of humans, men and women, to develop in a way where the men will just tend to dominate them. This will just happen over and over again. And it's because of these very core basic features of men and women. Women are childbearers, they're disposed to care for children, and men are physically stronger and better able to hunt. That's just over and over again going to lead to this relationship. Now, as I said, I'm going to leave it at that. I think just on its face, folks are going to find this explanation dissatisfying. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But let me just mention a few things about Lerner and her response to this traditionalist explanation. First, she rejects it. She finds it dissatisfying, but she doesn't reject all of it. She thinks, actually, as we're going to see, that this fact about women, particularly this fact about women, circa 10,000 years ago, or no, more like 5,000 years ago, was crucially important to the development of humanity and development of the early state. That kind of set the grooves for this domination pattern. The fact is that women are childbearers and disposed to care for children. That fact about female biology for Lerner is a big deal. It does a lot of explanatory work for her. But let me point out that where she's going to deviate from a lot of traditionalists is a lot of traditionalists will point to some fact like this and then make a kind of conclusion of an inference about what's justified. Because humans are like this, it's justified for them to organize in these ways. Well, one thing that she's going to show is that she's going to show is that, look, I can give you this account of why certain features, certain biological features of men and women are part of the explanatory story of how relationships of domination between men and women came into being. But and so I'm going to show why that is and how that is. But to show that is distinct from justifying those relationships or endorsing those relationships. And she at the end of her chapter 2, she clearly says, look, I am not justifying or endorsing these, I'm explaining them. And then she's going to point out even further that the conditions, these basic biological facts about humans that are part of the explanation of patriarchy, she's going to point out that those facts, those conditions, the existence of those facts, the existence of those conditions are consistent with the possibility of redesigning our institutions to eliminate patriarchy. The idea is that, well, it may have been, say 5,000 years ago, that these features led to these relationships of domination and sort of set the course of human history so that we've kind of internalized this way of relating. That doesn't mean that we can't adapt and undo those grooves that were set. Because as we're going to see, like those things are, though we can give a pretty clear causal explanatory account, it's not hardwired at a fundamental level that men dominate women, that men have inordinate control of economic power and political power, and have this kind of inordinate control over women's reproductive resources and so on. So the idea is that though there are good causal explanations of why these relationships came about, that's perfectly consistent with the possibility that today we can unwind a lot of what's happened over the millennia. Okay, so after she discusses the traditional account, she moves on to discuss Frederick Engel's Marxist account. Many of you folks probably know that Engels was someone who wrote quite often with Karl Marx in the 19th century. And so Engels, as someone who was often a co-author and has worked closely with Marx, Engels has a Marxist account of the origins of patriarchy. It's a pretty well-known account. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline some of the key features of Engel's Marxist account. And as we'll see, Lerner does sort of the same thing here that she did with the traditionalist account. She's going to take little bits of it that she thinks are part of the story that makes for a more complete account of the genesis of patriarchy. But she's not going to take all of it. She's going to, she's going to be critical of it in the sense that she's going to want to add more pieces to this tapestry to get a more complete picture. So let me just run down, though, some of the key elements of the Marxist account that Engels gives us as relayed to us by Lerner. So first, one element of this account is this claim that in tribal societies, the development of animal husbandry, the raising of livestock of various sorts, led to commerce and to ownership of herds by individual heads of families, men, presumably male. The second element, the surpluses from this animal husbandry, the surpluses from herding, were appropriated by men and became private property. That's the second element of this account. Third, once having acquired such private property, men sought to secure it to themselves and their heirs. And they did so by instituting the monogamous family. So the idea is that men, they created this private property in animal husbandry, and they were interested in securing it to themselves and their heirs. And to do that, they needed to put in place a monogamous family where moreover, what they had to do is they had to control women's sexuality so they could be very clear about who their heirs are, as opposed to illegitimate our offspring that were not actually theirs. So these men who control these resources want to keep them and select who shares in them, and they want to share them only with their heirs, their children. And in order to do that, the men are motivated to control women's sexuality, certain norms of monogamy, norms of fidelity, and these kinds of things, to make sure that they are passing off their private property, through their livestock and such, to their heirs. The final piece of this, brief sketch of Engel's account is this fourth little bit here. Engels says something like, look, with the development of the state, the monogamous family changes into the patriarchal family, in which the wife's household labor becomes a private service. The wife becomes the head servant, excluded from all participation in social production. So then the idea is that you get the creation of a state, and the state the state plays a key role in sort of consolidating these male livestock owners' control over their family and over their property. Okay. And then I think it's worth recounting this famous line from Engels that Lerner cites. So here's Engels. The first class opposition that appears in history coincides with the development of the antagonism between man and woman in monogamous marriage, and the first class oppression with that of the female sex by the male. Okay, so here's this basic Marxist account of male domination of women. Patriarchy on this account is the manifestation of a struggle between two classes, men and women. Now, something you should know to kind of make sense of what Engels is saying here is that for Marxists, classes are always defined in terms of the placements of groups of folks in society's division of labor. So, if Marx, just to give you an example, Marx describes capitalism and describes a kind of class antagonism in capitalism. And when he talks about class antagonism, he talks about two different classes of people that you pick out by describing where they fit in society's division of labor. The idea is that a society is something that works together to produce goods, and different people play different roles in the production of those goods. In capitalism, Marx points out that the way this division gets broken down is that there's one group of people that he would call the members of the working class or the proletariat, and what they do is they sell their labor and they provide the labor power, and that's where they fall in this division of labor. Then there's another class of people, the capitalists, and what they do is they provide the capital, the things to labor on, like the factories or the looms or the workshops or what have you. They own that stuff. And Marx's idea is that given your role in the division of labor, you're going to have different kinds of interests, and they're going to conflict with other persons' interests who occupy a different place in the division of labor. So the Marxist analysis of the antagonisms between men and women is one in which men have a characteristic role in the division of labor. And early in history, the idea is that men's role was to raise livestock, to engage in animal husbandry. And then women, their role in the division of kind of their reproduction, of the production of resources, is they tend to the household and they tend to the children, and they perform these reproductive services. So you have these two groups. They have different interests given their different placement in this production. And then what's really important is that, and this happens over and over again, according to Marx's story, that just about any division of labor you get, what you're going to see over and over again is one class of folks, for whatever reason, is going to have more power than the other class of folks in that division of labor. And Marx's the Marxist idea applied here is that for whatever reason, because men raised livestock, they not only have interests that conflict with women's interests, because women have different interests, revolving around their place in the division of labor, but also men, because they raise livestock, however, somehow playing that role in the division of labor gives them more power than women systematically. Playing that role somehow is supposed to enable them to dominate the other class. Just kind of a really big bird's eye view of Marxist analysis of anything is, look, what you do in a Marxist analysis is you identify the classes in a society, the placement of different groups in a division of labor, the interests that are associated with those different placements, and then you find the class that, given the configuration of the division of labor, that is somehow systematically the most powerful, just has more resources at its disposal. And then you're going to see like the main things you need to see to understand how that society works. Because ultimately what's going to happen over and over again, we get that kind of conflict of interests within a division of labor, is that the more powerful class is going to dominate the less powerful class in order to advance its interests at the expense of the antagonistic interests. The Marxist account of the domination of women is just supposed to be a variation on this same theme. The idea is that you just have these two different roles in society, one predominantly occupied by men, one predominantly occupied by women, and given the place those two roles, just the way it kind of works out, men are motivated and enabled to systematically dominate women. So let me say it again. Let me just restate Engel's line here, and maybe after all that background I just gave you, you will understand it a little bit better. I'll just read it one more time slowly. The first class opposition that appears in history coincides with the development of the antagonism between man and woman in monogamous marriage, and the first class oppression with that of the female sex by the male. Okay, so I think so what I've tried to do here is give you, the high points of this Marxist account, Engel's fairly well-known Marxist account of how men came to subordinate women. And Lerner is going to take threads from this story, but she thinks it is not complete. Her main question is going to be, the thing that she doesn't quite see is, I get the idea, I get how Marxist analysis works. In general, it's this class-based analysis with these antagonisms and the capacity of one class to dominate another. But she doesn't really get the particular details. Engels just sort of asserts these things. She doesn't see how this division of labor, where the men raise the livestock and the women tend to the needs of the household and do these kind of domestic tasks, she doesn't quite see how this division of labor enables men to dominate women. She wants to know how that works. Now, as we'll see, she thinks that Engels is on to something here. There is something about this division of labor that systematically advantages men and puts them in a position to dominate the women. And she wants to fill out those details. Her criticism of Engels is that, well, he just sort of just says that this is how it was. He doesn't explain exactly how this particular division of labor enabled men to dominate women. Lerner wants to fill in those details for Engels. Okay, so Lerner's trying to answer this question about the emergence of patriarchy. She cites the traditionalist account that references certain biological features of men and women. And she doesn't completely reject it, but she says, look, this is part of the story, but we need to add to it to get a complete account of how the patriarchy emerged. She does the same thing with Engels. She says, oh, this looks promising. There looks like there might be something here in this Marxist account, but we need to complete this. We need to add further details to get a more convincing story. And then she brings a third kind of line of thinking about how patriarchy emerged. And this has its origin, this third line has its origins in Claude Levi-Strauss's contribution to this little bit of explanation of our history. What Levi-Strauss, what his contribution is this idea that, key to the emergence of patriarchy is the commodification of women as units of exchange on a kind of market. The idea is that somehow men's domination comes to be through a process where men are able to basically turn women into kind of commodities that can be sold or exchanged in a kind of market. Now, once again, Lerner, I think, is going to accept this, but she's going to say, "Look, I'm puzzled. This raises further questions for me. I could see how the commodification of women is going to play a role in this explanation of the emergence of patriarchy. But how exactly does this work? How exactly did men pull this off? How are they able to commodify women?" Uh, so she's going to join. So what Lerner's going to do next is she's going to try to weave these threads, the traditionalist thread, the Marxist thread, and Levi Strauss's idea of the commodification of women. She's going to try to weave them together in a more complete tapestry. Okay. Now, uh, her vehicle for doing this is going to be the work of yet another anthropologist, Claude Melassu. And now, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to recount his basic story, and then we're going to see that Lerner just adds one bit to this story, or a couple bits to this story. And once she's done that, I think she feels like, okay, this looks like a plausible working hypothesis about how patriarchy came to be. So now let's back up a little bit, and I think some of our reading this course is going to help us quickly get into Melassu's account and just understand it quickly. So first, Melassu says, look, hey, there are these hunter-gathering societies. We've talked about these hunter-gathering societies. I think we have a pretty good handle on what those are like at this point in the course. So there are these hunting-gathering societies that originally, that's sort of the original state of human primates. And in these societies, men, women, and children engage in production, and they just consume what they produce, and they kind of live on a continual basis, on a sustenance type basis. Now, in these societies, group survival demands the demographic equalization of men and women. What that means is, look, you have these little bands that are kind of these small bands that are working together to go hunt, and then also to kind of gather stuff and maintain, a sufficient amount of sustenance for the group to survive. They're working together in these small bands. The idea is that group survival demands the demographic equalization of men and women. That means there have to be roughly an equal amount of men and women. And why is that? Well, we need that to be able to keep the population of the group, kind of stable. So you have to have roughly an equal number of men and women in the group so you can be reproductively successful and continue to carry on with a sufficient population of people in the group to reproduce, the members of the group and continue living in this way. Otherwise, your group's going to die out. Now, a problem is that it's difficult to sustain this demographic equalization because of women's biological vulnerability in childbirth. This leads, the idea is that for humans, giving birth to children is an extremely dangerous endeavor, and and a lot of women die in this process. Moreover, at this time period, to kind of maintain the population that you need to keep the group going, women need to have a lot of babies because a lot of your babies are going to die, either in childbirth or just due to infections or what have you. So you have to have a lot of babies to kind of maintain the population in the group. So that means women are in a position in these bands where they're basically going to have to be pregnant most of their adult lives so that they can have enough babies to keep the group going. But when you have that many pregnancies, the chances that you're going to die in one of those pregnancies is quite high at this period of time. And so that's going to put downward pressure on the group's ability to maintain the demographic equalization of the numbers of men and women. So what are these groups going to do? Well, what they're going to tend to do is they're going to tend to try to acquire women from neighboring groups. And then this is going to lead to a state of fairly continual intertribal warfare between these groups. Uh, what that's going to lead to is the development of a kind of warrior culture, folks skilled in the ability to carry out this task of acquiring women. Uh, Through this process, women are going to be thought of as possessions, and the reproductive capacity as a resource. Here we have the commodification of women. Here's a natural route to this commodification of women. Okay, now we add like another layer to this story. So the emergence of plow agriculture creates the possibility of elites. We discussed this at length with Scott. This non-laboring ruling class that is charged with overseeing and enforcing the plow agricultural activity of a larger laboring class. So this is this movement now that is going to, this is going to be a key uh, watershed moment in humanity where it's going to push folks out of this hunter-gatherer state. But already these hunter-gatherers are going to have developed this idea of women as a kind of commodity, and their reproductive capacity is a kind of commodity. You introduce plow agriculture, and then you introduce the elites, this non-laboring ruling class, in the Scott story. You kind of layer it on top of this existing set of ideas and institutions. And now you're going to have this group that are almost unfailingly men, that are these elites that are now engaged in trying to force folks to produce, under this umbrella of these states, all the stuff that Scott discussed. And these male elites in the early states that kind of have control over this laboring population, they are going to want to lay claim to this commodity that this reproductive capacity of the women. So the idea is that there's this this idea that's been developed through history where women are thought of as kinds of possessions, the reproductive capacity as a resource. Once the state comes onto the scene and the elites in that state come onto the scene, they're going to carry on this idea. They're going to carry on this concept, and they're going to see the value. They're going to continue to see the value of this reproductive capacity of women as a resource, and see women as a kind of commodity. And remember, now we can bring in this Scott story again to kind of fill out Melassu's account here. These men want as much surplus as possible. Remember, that's what's driving them to force other folks into this labor, this agricultural labor. These groups of male elites, they want as much surplus as possible, and women's reproductive capacity is a key resource for that. You need the stable population of laborers, and women's reproductive capacity is a key ingredient in maintaining that stable population. Okay, so these male elites that are, overseeing these, seeing these grain states, they're going to control the exchange of women. They're going to control. They're going to be driven to. They're going to have reason to control that as part of their control over these laboring resources, these surplus generating resources. These male elites, they control the exchange of women, and they enforce restrictions on their sexual behavior and acquire private property in women. In part, they do this to control other men, because if they control these women, they control these reproductive resources, they can allot them as prizes to men who will work for them in various ways. But also, they exert this control for the same reason that anyone who's domesticated anything, be it an ox or cattle or horses, are humans in this case. They're exerting this control because this is what you do with the domesticated resource that you use to generate a surplus for you. You control its sexual behavior, amongst other things. You also control its laboring behavior. Okay, so that there's a lot of threads to that story. I'm just trying to hit the highlights for you, and I invite you to go back to Lerner and see if you can trace out something similar to this same story, this fairly complex story that I've tried to rehearse for you here. Okay. Now, just like Lerner has questions for everybody else, even though Meillassoux has a very complex story that connects a lot of these dots, Lerner is still puzzled by particular bits of the story. She still has a question for Meillassoux. She's still not completely satisfied. Her question is, how do these small groups of males acquire exclusive control over the agriculture system? Why is it males that are at the top of this elite that's driving that's driving the forced labor of others? Why is it all males up there? Why was it men and practically no women who assumed the commanding heights of these early states? Why did that happen? So kind of go back to my overview here of Claude Meillassoux' story. I've bolded kind of here in the middle this claim that, look, the elites in these early states were almost unfailingly men. And Lerner's question is going to be, well, why? Why were they almost unfailingly men? And she begins to provide an answer. Here's the key premise of her answer. Her idea is that, look, there is this division of labor that was kind of in force at this time, and it started, deep into history. She speculates amongst other hunter-gatherers. The division of labor was basically along this line. Women in this time period, for all kinds of reasons that we've now rehearsed, were in a situation where they needed to bear a lot of children. Remember, women in this time period were pregnant for most of their adult lives. That's part of maintaining the population necessary, either for certainly for the hunter-gatherer stage of production. So Lerner's thesis is that given this state, women would gravitate toward occupations that were things that they could fulfill and do, and without too many breaks, even if they were pregnant and caretaking for a lot of the time. So for Lerner, one of the main reasons why women didn't perform the hunting role in the hunter-gatherers is because going out and hunting big game is not something you can do when you're 4 months pregnant. It's just not something that you could reliably do over and over again. However, you could do things like gather various agriculture. You perform various kinds of gathering activities. And this same idea would apply, I think, where Lerner speculates, to plow agriculture. Driving a plow through a field to produce grains is something that would be very difficult to do when 4 months pregnant. Tending to that requires just a lot of physical exertion that's difficult to do when in this state. So the idea is that men would, by and large, be the ones who would move into plow agriculture because this is physically extremely taxing, and women wouldn't. They do things that would contribute to the group's survival and production that were a better fit with the needs of childbearing and then child caretaking afterwards. So this draws. So her idea is that, look, men rather than women are going to be the ones that kind of take the lead when it comes to this agricultural system, and because they take the lead when it comes to this agricultural system, they're more likely to. They're going to be in a better position to exert control over the things that are produced by that agricultural system. And that's going to give them a kind of leg up in getting to the top of these commanding heights. And Lerner pushes a bit pushes a bit further on the same sort of idea. So uh, what she points out is, so like I said, there's this natural division of labor, and because of that, men take the lead when it came to plow agriculture. So this practice reinforces men's control over surpluses produced by the plow agriculture. So that makes it easier for them to get into this elite position. Uh, but then also, she notes that men were the warriors, thus they were well positioned to be the enforcers, controlling any surplus. And here's a really subtle point that I think is kind of interesting. Her idea is that, look, we have this division of labor, and when you improve laboring capacity, or when you productive capacity by introducing something like plow agriculture, that's going to create some possible leisure time. But she points out, look, if you have one group of folks who what they're doing is engaging in this plow agriculture, and that's kind of their role in the division of labor, they're going to get a lot more leisure time because there's going to be more downtime from engaging in this activity than they had before. There's much more downtime from plow agriculture, or maybe even downtime from engaging in warfare, the things that the men are generally going to do, than there is from food preparation and child rearing activities. That never goes away. So she speculates that, well, we shouldn't underestimate how important it was that men had more leisure times on their hands because of their placement in this division of labor. Uh, they had more leisure time to develop craft skills, to initiate rituals, and to think about ways to enhance their own power and influence and manage surpluses. Whereas women generally, by and large, were always busy with the relentless tasks of food preparation and child rearing activities that they're particularly suited to because of this biologically driven division of labor. Okay, so to sum up, here's what she says. In the course of the agricultural revolution, the exploitation of human labor and the sexual exploitation of women become inextricably linked. The story of men and women struggling up from necessity, from their helpless dependence on nature to freedom and their partial mastery over nature. In this struggle, women were longer confined to species essential activities than men and were therefore more vulnerable to being disadvantaged. That's her kind of summary of like her answer to the question she poses for Meillassoux. And remember, her question was, well, why did men take the commanding heights of these elites? Why were they the elites that controlled everybody else? Why weren't there some women in the mix? And this is her answer. And ultimately, the answer goes back to some of these same threads that you see in traditionalist accounts. There are these biological differences that led to a kind of division of labor. Now, we might ask how Scott adds to Lerner's picture. And I think the thing that he would really emphasize is that it isn't just agriculture that is the main driver, like the advent of plow agriculture that is the main driver of patriarchy. He would say, as we saw in our discussion of chapter 5, he would emphasize that a key part of this is the creation of states by elites seeking to extract a surplus from domesticated labor. So the idea is, and so remember, he points out that, look, agriculture came on the scene about 5,000 or 6,000 years before states came on the scene. And so the idea is that what you need is both this kind of institutional technology of states, where a state is this collection of folks who are able to impose their will on a larger segment of the population that are forced into labor. So it's a combination of the advent of this technology of things like plow agriculture, but then also this emergence of the idea that, hey, we can band together in these coalitions and we can dominate these others and make them work using this plow agriculture. That takes a few thousand years to figure out. And then it's both of those things together. Lerner emphasizes the agriculture bit. I think Scott would say, hey, you can't forget this other technology, this institutional technology of a state is another condition. Those two conditions go together, and they actually mutually support each other, because the state doesn't really make sense once until agriculture comes around, because the idea is that you use this technology of the state to make people labor in the agricultural fields. So you have to have both of those things, and once you have both of those things, that makes for the possibility of a set of elites who then can systematically impose their will on the rest of the folks. Now here, once we kind of fill out the picture even more completely with a little bit of help from Scott, I think we can get a clearer idea, maybe even a more persuasive idea of why men, not women, were much more likely to be members of these elites. That just extends a little bit Lerner's basic account. The idea is that men tend to belong to, they tend to be the warriors. They're the ones that, because of this basic division of labor, they're the ones that over and over again are going to fall into this warrior class. They're going to learn how to do this. They're going to organize. They're going to be groups of men doing this enforcing thing, this coalition of enforcers who are capable of holding a population down and forcing them to labor. Men are uniquely suited to participate in that warrior class because of this division of labor. Women simply can't do that in general. It's hard to be, a warrior or an enforcer if you are consigned to an adult life of almost continual pregnancy. So men become the folks who do that. So I think Scott would place greater emphasis on males' unique position to enforce others' labor rules. Men are better positioned to be warriors, and police to be they're better positioned to be part of this group that is able to work together to control others. And I think this fills out a bit more the answer to Lerner's question from SIU: why are men the main constituents? Almost the exclusive constituents of the controlling elite in these early states? It's got to be because of this division of labor, I think. They're the ones that are most likely to be the warriors. They're the ones that are most likely to be engaged in this task, and that's going to enable them and put them in a strong position relative to everybody else. So then a summary then, I think adding Scott into the fold here of the answer to this question, why did patriarchy emerge over and over again in history? The idea is that for the reasons I just described, it comes to be that groups of elite men, almost exclusively men, are the folks who control others, force them to labor intensively in order to produce a surplus. A key resource for this is women, their reproductive capacity. And it's particularly important for these men, these elite men, to control women's reproductive capacity in order to maintain the populations necessary to do the labor to achieve the desired surplus. That's I think, by holding Scott and Lerner together, I think we start to get this more complete picture, even more compelling picture of how this might have happened. Okay. Now let me just mention a couple more things. First, I want to just emphasize that to give an account of why it is that men over and over again came to dominate women is not to endorse that development. And Lerner, helps us with this at the very end of her chapter 2. She says, my argument sharply distinguishes between biological necessity, the biological necessity that women are going to engage in these childbearing activities, and that's going to lead to their particular placement in division of labor. My argument sharply distinguishes between biological necessity, to which both men and women submitted and adapted, and culturally constructed customs and institutions, which forced women into subordinate roles. I have tried to show how it might have come to pass that women agreed to a sexual division of labor, which would eventually disadvantage them without having been able to foresee the later consequences. So here's my summary. Women, for good reason, did not become warriors or field laborers. That would not have been a sensible division of labor, given the need for women to bear a lot of children during this time period. Neither women or men could have foreseen that this division would leave women as a class particularly vulnerable to male domination once Scott's elite-controlled reign state came on the scene. Okay. Now let me relate some of this material back to the key themes of the course. This is my last slide, and then I'm done with this, with the lectures for Assignment 3. So first, one key theme is the emergence of the capacity and the reality of small groups of men to dominate men in general, to domesticate men in general, and women in particular. And I think something that's relevant to what we've been discussing the last couple of weeks, particularly relevant to the course, is that this capacity of small groups of men to do this has a common causal origin. The capacity of men to dominate men generally and women in particular, those two, those two capacities, they have a common causal origin. The common causal origin is that there is an elite that's motivated to control others, to force them to labor and engage in reproductive activities of a certain sort as the means to producing a surplus that benefits the elite. That's what's driving all of this. That's the common origin of patriarchy. It's a common origin of exploitation in general of one set of humans of another set of humans. So this also is what plays a key role in forcing the move from the relatively egalitarian hunter-gatherer stage to these relations of domination in the state, once it is possible for some to work together to systematically force others to labor on their behalf. As I mentioned before, the advent of plow agriculture is a necessary condition of the existence of this capacity, but it's not enough. There's this institutional capacity, technology as well. The capacity of a coalition of persons, generally men, to systematically control a laboring population. Both those things have to happen. So what we've done, I think, is we've given an account of the emergence of what we might want to call domination relationships. And I think a key theme that's coming through is that the thing that we're interested in is relationships in which one subset of folks is forcing others to engage in behavior that disproportionately serves the interests of the controlling set of folks. That's the kind of relationship that I think we're generally interested in when we talk about despotism or domination. We'll keep fleshing this out, but I think this historical detail, this historical background, I'm hoping it kind of gives kind of support for that account of domination, and I hope it suggests that, look, that's the thing in these time periods that we're particularly interested in. That's the morally problematic thing that's going on here. We want to give it some name, and it seems like the appropriate name to give it is something like despotism or domination. All right, that's all I've got. I look forward to talking to you on Thursday about this.